Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's WSBA Crypto Roundup for June 14th, 2024. I'm Josh, and I'm here with my amazing co-hosts, Ron, Quaranta, and David Brill. We're zooming in from the Wall Street Blockchain Alliance, and a few disclaimers before we hop into what has been a really politically whirlwind type week. So, at least for crypto. So, the disclaimers are nothing that we're about to say is legal advice, investment advice, tax advice, accounting advice, any kind of advice, but these are our thoughts and they're our thoughts. They're not necessarily our employer's thoughts or the WSBA's thoughts or any other person's other than ourselves. So, with that, and with every other possible caveat, we have here the two amazing folks with their crystal balls who will be discussing some of the really hottest issues this week. So, David and Ron, what are we seeing from a political perspective? Seems like everything.
David, I got to weigh in with I can't believe she brought up the crystal balls immediately at the start of the conversation. And I never thought we'd live in a world where two presidential candidates are suddenly accepting crypto for donations, particularly the sitting president who arguably has not been a crypto friend up until about 48 hours ago or so, which made my head explode, David. You and I texted about some of this. I'd love your thoughts.
I mean, this could be like a crypto comedian monologue, but I'll just throw a few little things that I thought were pretty amusing. So one is, I guess the president's willing to accept unregistered securities in his campaign. So I'm just wondering if President Biden, accepts anything besides Bitcoin and ETH. Does that mean that they're not securities? Is that any kind of campaign election raising issues? I don't know. I'm not familiar with those things, but that was one thing. And the irony of having the SEC going after Coinbase for now several years, and now he's going to use Coinbase Commerce to accept donations. And again, clearly nothing against Coinbase here, but seeing the irony in that the administration's been going after them, and now they're using Coinbase. So, I will say this, the crystal ball has been doing really well in 24. I did not think I would see that from the administration.
David, I just want to throw one thing out there, Josh. Coinbase is not a member, but shout out to the Coinbase team.
Yeah.
I wonder what the response was. How many eye rolls were there from the executive team when someone from the president's reelection campaign called and said, how do we accept crypto for political donations? How many heads were spinning when they got that conversation, when they had that conversation?
I'm sure they thought it was a spam call.
Yeah. The other thing, Josh, if I could, and you were right, there's been a lot of kind of political stuff that happened.
You heard me choking as you guys were laughing before.
The other thing I had seen, and I believe it was the House Financial Services Committee, someone correct me if I'm wrong, but it was the annual testimony from Chair Gensler and Rosalind Benham, chair of the CFTC. I've not watched the entire video, but it was really, really telling. I think it was Representative Haggerty, probably screwing this up, but David, I don't know if you saw it, asked, is Ethereum a security? Is Ethereum a commodity? And the CFTC chair immediately said yes. And the SEC chair went on this kind of long non-answer. And you could just see the gears turning around. How do we get out of actually answering this? And I was just struck by that dichotomy. The CFTC chair has absolutely no problem saying Ethereum is a commodity, essentially not a security. But the SEC chair still can't weigh in on that.
It is pretty surprising at this point that they haven't taken a view, right? Not that we necessarily want them to take one particular view, right? But I think with respect to the CFTC, that part isn't a surprise because the CFTC has long been saying that digital assets are commodities, right? And that if they're a security, also, that's a totally separate test.
Yep.
So it is, but definitely not just from an optics perspective. I was about to say from an optics perspective, it doesn't look good, but from another perspective, I mean, how many years out are we? How can the market know if nothing can be articulated or even as an allegation? Right? It's not that someone's saying oh, okay. So say they say it's not a security. fantastic. The industry is happy, right? But even if they try and allege that it is, they can't get that far. Not that we want them to get that far. But David, what do you think?
Look, I think it ties into the fact that they're bringing cases against a number of ERC20 tokens, and so if they go full throated that they don't think Ethereum is a security, which the three of us don't, that it undermines their enforcement actions in some way against the other ERC20 tokens. That's my theory. And I think also, we have to remember that I don't think that the SEC chair's view has changed. I think maybe some of his boss's views have changed. And so, he's staying consistent to his view of the world.
I got to do the shout out to Larry Miller, who's dating all of us. Those who remember the show Happy Days may recall the inability of the fonts to say I was wrong. Although I've never heard the SEC chair being compared to the fonts. Larry, that's an entirely different conversation, probably reserved for happy hour.
I do want to say something more broadly, Josh. Sorry.
No worries.
I really have to say that Caroline Crenshaw, the SEC, one of the commissioners, has now been nominated for a second term. And as I really think about it and connect the dots, I'm not really convinced that the current administration's mood towards crypto has really changed. I don't think we've really seen anything tangibly that has changed. The ETF approval, I think, is really a matter of the SEC didn't want another court case brought against them, and then to potentially lose that court case. And the futures and the ETH futures already out there. But everything else, SAB 121 was still vetoed. Caroline Crenshaw is being recommended for a second term. Elizabeth Warren certainly hasn't changed her views on things. So, I don't want to pour cold water on. I think crypto is going to play a major role in this campaign as sort of a wedge issue and in financing. But I haven't seen anything really that shows me that this administration's views have changed in any kind of material way.
There's a disingenuousness to it. And again, I'm not talking about the let me rephrase that. David, I'm not talking about the politics of party, Democrat or Republican Party, but this is a bit of disingenuous political theater in my mind. And the three of us had spoken about on this broadcast and on separate meetings, even in text messages, that it seems like the election will be decided at the margins. So when we're looking at the world of crypto, the years of crypto is not significant enough to matter now are clearly gone, because 1% of the vote matters, sub 1% of the vote matters, 2% matter. And I think, both parties are looking at that. Donald Trump wasn't exactly a big supporter of crypto. And now we're having ridiculous dialogues about all of remaining Bitcoin should be mined, quote unquote, in the United States. So to me, that's a bit more of political theater. So I sort of disagree. I sort of agree with you, David. And it is sad and frightening how much of what we're focused on depends on the election. Yeah.
Look, I think we've been talking about this for a while, that people in our community need to stand up and be accounted for and to donate, and really get to know their local congresspeople. And now we have PACs. I think it's really a matter of, it's a tight election. It's a real wedge issue, and the people who care about it are willing to, put money or put value behind it. I think this has been a multi-year effort, but now is the time, and people are taking advantage of that.
I think Josh should run for office.
Oh gosh, I don't know about that. My cat just jumped around with a.
When I said run for office.
Yes, exactly. But what I can say, some interesting news this week, certainly in terms of moves from a political perspective, it looked like President Biden has tapped CFTC Commissioner Goldsmith Romero for a role at the FDIC, and she was quoted previously as saying we need to make sure we get things right with respect to crypto, and at least reportedly has working groups that include numbers of folks from the industry, really reputable folks. And so it would be, I think, interesting to see what kind of an impact that may have on the FDIC. I think also there's been there have been statements, I don't know whether it's been confirmed, but that Commissioner Johnson of the CFTC would be nominated for a role of Assistant Secretary for Financial Institutions at the Treasury Department. Yeah. So I think it's the cross-pollination from the CFTC. I mean, can we think that that may be a positive for the other regulators?
I'm gonna go be naysayer on this, Josh, and for a couple of reasons. One is, though they might have had slightly more flexible perspectives on things like crypto and blockchain, from the FDIC perspective, proposed chair Romero will spend the better part of a year trying to clean up FDIC before the next round of Congress calling them to the bar for another series of contentious testimony. I think this is shuffling some of the pieces on the checkerboard just to cover seats that need to be covered because, again, there's an election coming up. To David's point, the proof will be in the pudding of what they say post the election, whoever wins.
Yeah, and just remember, just because people say things are an election cycle doesn't mean they'll do them after they get elected. So, and I say that across the board. So yeah. I think all of us really need to be extremely pragmatic about what we're hearing and seeing, and really try and understand, what people are willing to commit to or actually do, before the election.
All of that being said, Josh, David and I had the opportunity last evening. We attended an event. Shout out to Anand Scythian and our friends over at Crowell. I hadn't been to Hudson Yards, but the buildings over there are amazing, David. But it was a really interesting conversation. And one of the takeaways I had, David, was they had a couple of speakers that had history at the SEC and I believe DOJ, is that education curve that we've been speaking about for years. So the conversation in DC has a core of people who get it and are either pro or really anti-crypto, but there's so much education still that needs to be done. And one of the comments that were made last night was, innovation's progressing faster than many regulators and legislators can grab a hold of it. And I think, David, that's still a challenge. Tell me I'm wrong.
Yeah, it still is a challenge, but I think the fundamental challenge has been that since the commission has just taken the view globally that all crypto, besides Bitcoin, are securities, they never really staffed the organization with people in trading and markets or corp finance to really think about and reimagine what the rules would look like.
Yeah.
And without having spent that time in reimagining what the rules may look like, I think that's really the thing where, the innovation has grown even faster in the last few years, but that's why I think things are so far behind. Yeah. Like, we've joked about it, like, well, register as what? Yeah. And I think as more products come to market and more the ability to do more things and more functionality, we're just sort of further behind in that narrative. And look, these rules, like, let's be clear, like, writing the new rules isn't easy. And I think even the three of us might have a different view on what the rules should be and how they'd be implemented, but you have to start somewhere. And it feels like, that's been stunted with the focus on enforcement.
Yeah, I made the mistake, Josh, of saying, does Howie need to evolve last night? And a bunch of eyes just rolled in the room. Josh, I cut you off. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, like, is the answer fresh blood or new? Not fresh blood, like, in a bad sense. I mean, in a good sense. Like, is it new people coming into the regulators? Is it really something where we have to rely on Congress? Is it the administration? Like, is there a way to fix it faster? I know everyone in the whole industry is working on this, but just curious your thoughts.
I just feel like it's that generational conversation all over again. We had the same issues broadly when people started talking about using electronic signatures, when people started talking about doing, digital trading and not needing stock certificates. And it takes a generation or two. And to your point, Josh, a lot of the people in the regulators now and a lot of the incumbents and a lot of the people in the legislature now have not known anything other than working with banks and intermediaries and brokerage firms. And, age jokes aside, that apparently is de rigueur when we talk about politics right now. These people come from a world where none of this existed. But the next crop of people who take regulator roles and take roles in the Congress might understand. 20, 30 years from now, the three of us are going to be the older people looking at technology and not understanding it. I just think it takes time. And as fast as we want it to go, some things are systemically not able to go that fast. They're just not.
What do you guys make, by the way, of the statements by Gary Gensler this week, reportedly about the spot ether ETFs and the headlines that followed, which seemed to make folks think that the ETF could get approved this summer? What are your thoughts?
I'm going to let David start with that one.
I'm gonna take the view that, especially in this climate, that I'm gonna take the view that I'm gonna believe that statement. That I think it would be very unpopular for them to drag it out longer than that, and I don't think there's anything to be gained. The die has been cast. I am sure that all the sponsors have people really focused on fixing whatever issues are with their S1s or whatever perceived issues there may be. So I don't think there's anything to be gained by preventing it going to market. And while I think, in my mind, it probably could go faster, I think the end of the summer, I'd be really surprised if we didn't see one before Labor Day.
I agree with you, David. I will, and again, this is going to sound like SEC chair bashing. I don't mean it to be, but when you look at the public statements, the exact same reason he put forward or wouldn't allude to for the spot Bitcoin ETF, because they were futures and they'd been around for a while, is suddenly, oh, well, of course it'll probably be approved because there's ether futures, and why wouldn't it be approved? And just this kind of, remember the ancient Greek god Janus who had two faces, and I'm going all mythological here. Like how do you in good conscience say some of these things? And I don't know the man, and I don't mean this to be the session like I want to beat up on him, but what? I'm always struck by these 180s. I've also not had enough coffee today, so I'm sorry to you both.
No worries. Go. Oh wait, David, were you going to say something?
I was going to say that ultimately, if the administration wants to show anything to the community, like this is the low-hanging fruit to them, for them to show. Because I'm not convinced that really right now, unless they do make other changes, that anything else will change before the election from the administration. So if this is the only thing they're going to give us before the election, then it's in there better for them to give it to us sooner than later.
Well, what to make, by the way, guys, of this Senate bill that now reportedly folks from the industry are meeting with a key Senate office. This is reported in CoinDesk, and this is about that provision that we talked about a little bit last week that snuck through in the spending package from the Senate's Intelligence Committee that was targeting alleged crypto ties to terrorism and things like that. Now, obviously, many in the industry, including probably us, believe that it perhaps is not the best path forward, to say the least. And it has been reported that many folks in our industry are speaking with the Senate Intelligence Panel's chairman, Senator Warner. Some are predicting that this provision isn't likely to survive the budget process. I would love to hear your thoughts. And by the way, this what I'm looking at right now for those listening at home is a piece by Jesse Hamilton. It says Senate bill could open crypto to U.S. sanctions, but industry trying to head it off.
I'll kick off, David, if I could. And David, Josh, if I could, just to the audience, thank you for everyone who's joining us on LinkedIn and on X. If you've got questions or comments for any of the three of us, please do post them in the chat. Josh, I haven't dove too deeply into it. I shout out to Adam Goldberg and Dean Ellis. I wish they were both here. But for me, when I look at these kind of additions to budget conversations, everyone brings up the very broad aspect of it. It's broad, it's over-inclusive, it's not very detailed. But that's a hard conversation, because you can imagine from a regulatory perspective or sanctions perspective, they need the broadness to stop the illicit activity that they want to stop, which we all agree needs to be stopped. But I think the industry concern is it's so broad, it's just going to scoop up everybody. And I suspect that's part of the conversation. And I don't envy the task for either side of that, because you need it to be broad in some respects, but not so broad that, computer programmers are suddenly brokers, for example.
Look, I'm skeptical of anything that gets sort of shoved into a bill at the last second without the sunlight of commentary and thoughtfulness. So, I'm probably playing the same tune that I've played before, but it's my hope that with now that the sunlight is there, that we get some thoughtfulness on how it gets drafted. I just, I have to hide my healthy, or tamper down my healthy skepticism of the intentions of why I got slipped in there, and then I hope that it's something that gets reviewed, negotiated, and proper guardrails are put up before anything is approved.
David, I agree with you, but the more I learn about the process in DC, the more I realize stuff just gets jammed into, like so much of how Washington operates is jam something into a bill that doesn't really get a lot of the light of day that it might need. But how do you move the process forward if every single thing goes through that process?
Well, I mean, we've gotten a lot of bills passed in the past, so
yeah, fair point. All right.
Look,
go ahead.
I was just going to say, the idea of representative government isn't that, we just hide everything and push things the bills in the last minute. It's supposed to be a process that's open and accessible.
I'm gonna say it, David. It goes back several years. We've got to pass the bill to find out what's in the bill. Sorry.
I mean, I feel like it goes beyond the bills. I mean, if you think about some of what's been introduced in terms of proposed rules by the SEC, right? Like the one that allegedly related to treasuries or something like that, but it was really, communications protocol systems and expanding the definition of exchange, right? So I think not just in Congress, but across the board, really having to parse things. And I agree. I like in the past until really relatively recently, and only in the context of crypto, have I begun to understand some of the process as it, to the limited extent that I do understand it. So speaking of things that, go ahead.
I was just going to add one last thing to that, Josh. I'm really sorry, but it is interesting when we have these conversations, and the three of us and a lot of members in the Wall Street Blockchain Alliance have spoken about kind of, again, respectfully to the SEC. The SEC is on the back foot, when it comes to crypto. But to be clear, it's not just the crypto space that's really pushing back on how the SEC's do. The Alternative Investment Management Association notched a win. I think it was for private fund reporting. A lot of the banks and broker dealers are pushing back on some of the different reporting requirements. So I just don't want the audience who's watching, and thank you all for joining, to think that we sit here and David and I will have we'll all have conversations about the SEC, and I feel like every one of them I start with, I'm not trying to bash on the chair and the SEC, but a lot of different verticals in the industry, not just crypto, are really pushing back on how regulators are operating, because there's a true negative impact, they believe, to some of the things that are happening. And I just wanted to throw that out there for the audience, Josh.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've seen that in a variety of spaces, not only SAB 121, right? Yes. But we could see that certainly in that instance. I think one of the things that I would love to hear from you guys, if your crystal balls / magic 8 balls, whatever there may be, magic mirror on the wall, the economic data, what's it saying? This has been a very surprising time.
Can I share with the audience that around 8:30 and 30 seconds every morning that there is an economic report out, I'm texting David and you, Josh, around what happened. So for the audience, David, I'll set us up. Earlier this week, we had, CPI, Consumer Price Index information come out that came out lower than expected, which indicated that inflation is slowing down a bit. And then I think a day or two later, we also had the Producer Price Index. For anyone in the audience who's really bored, I'll tell you, Producer Price Index is sort of upstream. It's the prices that producers of goods pay that kind of seep down into the prices that the three of us and regular people would pay, and is really painting a picture of slowing inflation, which is kind of the thing the Federal Reserve chair and the Federal Reserve broadly wants to see. And the Federal Reserve had its open market meeting this week, and I think they had a commentary that their stance hasn't changed. They really are data dependent. David, I'm so sick and tired of hearing data dependent or dot plot for the economists out there, but it's looking like potentially one interest rate cut this year. There's a lot of mechanics behind the scenes. David and I keep wagering on how many cuts there will be this year, hoping that an interest rate cut will spur the economy. But David, we're gliding into lower inflation, and everyone wants that to happen faster.
So I think it's super interesting because there are like so many dimensions to this. And I think part of it is that people want to see lower interest rates because the lower cost of borrowing hits everybody across the board. Mm-hmm. So it might mean your mortgage rates are lower. It might mean your credit card rates are lower, but where student loan rates are lower. But I think the problem is we've questioned the numbers in the past and the quality of the numbers. And I think that maybe the skepticism by the Fed to lower rates is a skepticism of the quality of the numbers, and that what they're getting may not reflect what's going on. I mean, what I think is that people think the economy isn't doing very well because the costs that they face every day have either continued to gone up or are just now stabilizing. I mean, uniformly, everybody I hear who goes out to the grocery store, goes to dinner, notices that things just cost more. And I think, people who have less discretionary spending, it hits them harder. So I wonder if they're really internalized all this information and they're like, we really don't want to make a rate cut until we really see more data and we're convinced that the data is good data. Because once they lower, to actually go on the other side and have to go in the other direction, it's going to be a real problem. And I think it will lose a lot of credibility if they have to flip in the other direction.
For the record, I don't think
David. 1 second, but I'll be right back.
I don't think David is worrying about the prices when he dines at Le Bernardin every time he's in New York City. David, I'm sorry you walked away for that. And Josh, if I could, I'm going to. David, I don't know if you caught it, but I will repeat it because I enjoyed it. Okay. When you're in New York City and your usual dining spot, Le Bernardin, I'm sure you're not too worried about the caviar prices there. And I agree with you from the perspective, David, of everyday costs, particularly things like fuel, particularly things like food. I'm going to disagree with you about the Fed, though. I think they are on board with the data. I think they're on board with how they look at R-star and try to figure out the data coming in. I think they are very much about 1 month does not a trend make. I think this is a different conversation. This is a conversation about the history of failure of the Fed. And the reason I say that is for those of us who are old enough to remember, everyone looks back to the 70s, right, David, and says, oh my God, we don't want stagflation. People forget, or even the early 80s when Alan Greenspan was breaking the back of inflation before kind of the 80s, quote unquote, boom, that was a pretty bumpy road. Inflation hit highs, really collapsed, and then the Fed really took their eye off the ball and inflation shot up again. So it ended up being 2 years of people suffering in these waves of the Fed just not getting it right. I think Jerome Powell is in a tough spot of he doesn't want to repeat that history. He'd rather go slower, even though the entirety of the country is saying, damn it, lower interest rates because economic activity will pick up. I think they're concerned about Fed legacy.
Yeah, I totally agree about them being conservative. But I do want to point out that even Powell took a swing at the jobs numbers this past month.
Yeah, fair.
And said that those weren't consistent with what he thought the jobs were, or something to that effect. Yeah. So which caught me by surprise because it's something we've been saying for a while. Look, the dollar is strengthening against foreign currencies, and so it just creates all these sort of different dynamics. I will say this: I understand why they're being more conservative about it. I don't know. I just don't know that it's benefiting people. And I would say more like the lower and mid-range consumers.
Sure.
I think they're getting hit more so than wealthier people. And if you think about it, if you think about the narrative of what our election's about, that's sort of the people who I think are really most impacted. So I think there's another level to that they should be considering.
Yeah, David. And look, staple food prices are still higher. I'm sorry, Josh.
No, it's okay.
Yeah, jump in.
Staple food
No,
prices
let
are
me
still
let
higher.
Ron finish.
I agree with David. Staple food prices, which really hit low and middle income harder, and fuel prices are still higher than they were, if I recall, in some measures since before COVID. So, Josh, please go ahead.
Oh, it was sort of an observation / question, because you guys certainly have more of an economist bent than I do. Although I'm learning from these text messages that Ron and David have been messaging that I lurk and watch. So, some say, that high inflation rate is good for crypto because people worry about fiat losing value. But then when I think about what happened when we had a really low interest rate, is a lot of people were chasing yield, and that led them to DeFi and other sorts of opportunities in crypto to get some kind of enhanced return. And I guess I'm just wondering, is it all positive for crypto either way in your view?
I just want to start that conversation, David, by pointing out how happy I am that Josh used the phrase chasing yield.
Yeah.
I learned from you guys.
This is the best day of the week so far. David, why don't you start, buddy?
So I think there's a real correlation. The weaker the dollar, the better crypto and Bitcoin in particular is doing. So I think that's like table stakes. But no, I think if there's cheaper money, people are willing to put their money towards riskier assets. So I think lower interest rates are better for us as an industry and are better for people who want to invest in the industry. But like just looking broadly speaking, it's really interesting. I think the interest rate should be lower, but I also think that inflation's higher than what's being reported. So I think we're in this sort of interesting conundrum. And then on top of that, I think that our dollar, because Canada and Europe lowered interest rate, is getting stronger, and a stronger dollar is worse for crypto. So we have all these sort of cross currents going on. It makes life interesting. But I will talk about crypto prices a little later. But what do you think, Ron?
I mean, agree with you on the undercurrents, but in the context of all that, I guess I'm jumping ahead to crypto prices. It almost steam seems to be coming out of the balloon of the price run up post the spot Bitcoin ETF. Right. When you look at some of the technicals now, David, what are we looking at? 60,000 for Bitcoin, and I don't see the catalyst to get us far above 60K until bluntly the election. It just seems we're in a channel of downtrend for crypto that just to me is taking a little of the speculative froth out of the system.
So I just flipped to the prices for a second here. So I think you have a combination of like the sell in May and go away.
Yeah.
I think, interest rates aren't going down and people thought that was coming in the stronger dollar. But, I really thought we would push through to a new high sooner.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's going to kind of be that, end of August, early September before we see. Oh, look at that cute dog.
Who's our guest, Josh?
This is Honey.
Honey wants some attention.
Unexpectedly.
But I will say is that we're in the midst of like a very stealthy like altcoin sell-off.
Yes.
We're retracing significantly from where we were with the altcoins going up. And so, I think the altcoins, if I had more time to look, might be sort of in like a bear market right now from where they were.
Really?
Yeah, I think there's been more than a 20%, retracement in altcoins. I think we're sort of trending down right now. But look, there are a lot of catalysts that could come that will change this. If the wirehouses finally gave approval to people to buy crypto, there's a lot of money locked up and a lot of liquidity waiting to get into the market. And I also think the Ether ETF will be a positive. I think the Ether ETF may spur, those entities that are being very conservative to maybe be like, okay, well, now we have a second crypto ETF and we've had 6 months to vet the Bitcoin ETF. And, I think now we're at a place where we're comfortable where we can let our clients, buy those.
David, are you concerned that some of the estimates from some of the vendors, the providers that will offer the issuers rather, are anticipating lower volume uptake for the Ethereum spot ETF versus the Bitcoin spot ETF? Or is it just a matter of market cap and size, just to manage the liquidity?
I mean, well, market cap and size for one. But I think, look, I think Ether is like the silver to Bitcoin's gold.
Yeah.
So,
Fair
look,
enough.
I think if we could get 20 to 30% of the Bitcoin volume and assets under management ETF and the Ether ETF, I don't think we're in a bad place at all.
I feel like someone keeps trying to hand Josh a cup of coffee from her right side.
No, I mean, the full disclosure, as I think you guys may know from last week, last Thursday was my children's last day of school, and first day of camp has not yet begun. So, electronic games in the next room.
We should just start getting them on the show, Josh, at this point. I would love their opinions on some of the stuff we're doing.
I mean, I just can't wait till they go to camp.
Oh boy, my daughter would give a really buzzworthy monologue on crypto and what is this electronic money? You know.
Can I raise a topic, Josh, for us?
Of course.
Something
and
we
I was
haven't.
just kidding. For anyone who's at home, I love my kids.
She's an amazing mother, folks. Please don't read into anything David or I are joking about. One of the things we didn't talk about was CZ. And, who would have imagined in a world where a billionaire's worth doubles while they're being sentenced and start serving a 4-month term at a federal prison in the United States? Like, what kind of weird world do we live in?
Actually, it's not so counterintuitive, Ron. Like, if you think about it, BNB was really sold off a lot because people didn't know what was going to happen to Binance. But now that they, have clarity on what's going to happen to Binance, and they're, in my mind, sort of operating business as usual, but with better, with more thorough compliance regime, and not taking, American consumers. They have a lot of innovative things they're doing on their platform, and the price of BNB's doubled.
Yeah.
So, I'm actually not surprised, but normally I would be surprised, Ron. But this one actually kind of makes sense.
I bring it up, David, in the context of everything that we see in markets and the stuff that's happened in the States, crypto or not. It is just an unusual, who's going to get the movie rights to that story kind of thing in my mind as well.
Well, look, the Binance thing is really interesting because it really wasn't a knock on their fundamental business.
Right.
Like, they weren't front-running trades.
Yep.
They weren't misusing client assets.
Yep.
They were alleged to be, and they settled to being deficient in their compliance realm.
Yeah.
And ultimately, if you look at running a business, that compliance realm didn't really affect the business they were running. It really meant that there were people on their platform that shouldn't be there. So that's why with this example, I'm pushing back just a little bit, but with other ones, I totally get.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of a movie title, I mean, not that this would be one, but it's almost like a tale of two titans, right? Like, if you look at the story of CZ and then you look at the story of SBF, right? Multi-letter monikers, right? But very different fact patterns.
Yeah.
And but definitely a story where there is deep intertwinement, including living on Twitter,
Yeah.
right? So yeah, would make for an interesting story.
The other opposite case might be is Terraform. Like, I again, from the perspective of the SEC and regulators, I think it was announced, and one of you correct me if I'm wrong, or someone in the audience, massive multi-billion-dollar settlement. And I think it was, shout out to Jeff John Roberts at Fortune, who wrote an amazing profile, which is, okay, nice, clickbait, but they're broke. They got no money. How does any of this matter? And it makes me wonder, David, I've often asked you and Josh this, like, where do these numbers come from? Or is it more theater? And I'm not minimizing, the things that Terraform did and how the SEC approached it and justice, but why do those numbers matter? No one's going to get them. No one harmed is going to get them.
It's a good question. One of the things been thinking about more is as some of the other cases go forward, maybe this is their way of quantifying the harm and doing it in a way that they can say is consistent when they look at the ripples of the world or the other sort of projects that they may bring enforcement actions on in the future. So maybe there's sort of a methodology and formula that they're using that they might use in other cases where entities do have the assets. That's my giving them the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah, fair.
Why those numbers have come. So that's my sort of view. But it's clear that I think Terraform had 200 million in the bankruptcy estate approximately.
Yeah.
So clearly there's a huge delta between what's being penalized and what's actually there.
But it was a 10x difference, right, Josh? Like 2 point something billion, I think, or something like that.
I think it may have even been higher. I think I saw something like, I think I saw 4.5 billion.
Okay.
Yeah, but I do wonder, like David suggested, maybe there's some sort of precedent that they're trying to set in terms of like, okay, here's the baseline, and also for deterrence.
Yeah.
Right. I know in the past, and I won't go into any particular settlements, but we did see one a while ago where hundreds of millions, or actually, if I remember correctly, $4 billion were raised and a $20 million fine in the past. So, that definitely, I think, sent one type of message.
Fair.
Back in the day. And I guess maybe the intent is to send another type of message, but I don't really know.
Yeah. Look, I think ultimately, as long as everybody knows that, besides the 200 million approximately in the bankruptcy estate, unless Do Kwon's been hiding a lot of crypto somewhere else, like that's really the amount that's going to be recovered and paid back to creditors. So, but we shall see.
Well, so a question for you guys on that. Okay. And I know, David in particular, you have, it seems, a lot of experience with bankruptcy proceedings and how that all plays out. Ron, I'm sure you do as well.
But not like David.
Yeah. So I guess what I'm wondering is, so say there is, the $200 million bankruptcy estate, and then the SEC does have this judgment, right? Presumably they're in the list of creditors, right? And is that if other creditors who might be retail persons or other persons who've suffered harm, is the fact that the SEC is in there with the judgment, does that really benefit those people who suffered harm? Or are they potentially getting crammed down in some respect with respect to what they can get back?
I don't really see, and in other cases, they've kind of subrogated those claims of those of like clients or customers of the exchanges. So don't want to assume, but it feels like that they would subrogate the claim to other, especially individual creditors and things like that. But maybe maybe there's a stash of Bitcoin somewhere that Do Kwon has, and if he does, and that were somehow be brought into the bankruptcy estate, then they would want to, have the right to it. But I think individual creditors would get paid out first.
David, how much of that sits with the bankruptcy judge and the court itself?
Well, look, the bankruptcy judge can't. I mean, if they have a legitimate claim and it's approved by the court, I think it's something that the government, I think, has taken a reasonable position on. In that, look, the government's going to get this money before shareholders would, if there are shareholders. But I think there's an understanding that individual creditors who've been harmed need to be repaid first.
It does make me also think, and I have no reason to believe that Do Kwon is holding this either, but if we think about what unfolded with respect to FTX and some of those investments by Alameda, right, where they ended up becoming quite valuable, it could be, who knows?
Who knows?
Yeah, look, I mean, these illiquid tokens and illiquid investments, SBF, he directionally, made good bets in AI, and look, Solana's, definitely accumulated and has had a really good year so far. So regardless of the other things that went on, he did make some strategically good bets in the ecosystem.
To be clear, good bets with other people's money who he shouldn't have.
Yes.
Just for any
Yes,
lack of
absolutely. But look, but that's actually it brings to a funny point, because you see in the press a lot of times that FTX is paying 100 cents on the dollar, that they've fully paid out claims, and we just have to remember that all these claims were dollarized, so people have not gotten their crypto back in full. And I think it's great that anything you can do to maximize recovery for creditors, that's really positive. But I just think the narrative should change, and that it's really the dollarized claims, and it's not the value of their crypto.
the real beneficiaries to me, David, and we're going way off script, Josh, I'm sorry, is the purchasers of those claims. There were funds that bought into some of these crypto bankruptcy claims that did quite well because they were paying out to the original claimants 10 cents or less on the dollar, I think, and now they're getting, more than 10 cents on the dollar.
Well, look, they are, but there's always a market. So somebody has to be willing to sell, and somebody has to be willing to risk, take the risk to buy. So I think on that one, Ron, yes, absolutely, they are, but they also did take on a risk, and they decided that they could get more than what the value of those claims were.
There's no market for Ron coin, I found out. No, I'm total joke. I've never issued any tokens to anyone in the audience. Please don't ask.
But it is interesting, and yes, they've done very well. But that's kind of like being shrewd and taking a risk, and it paying off.
Yeah.
So what are you all focused on next week? I think there's a lot of interesting things bubbling up as we get into the real heat that I think the East Coast is going to see, and and Florida's seen a lot of rain. So,
Josh, do you want to kick off?
So I'm not going anywhere
we
next
left
week
her speechless.
like that, to my knowledge, at least not yet. So I will be following the news, following the developments, as always. I am looking forward, though, in July. I'll just mention July 11th and 12th. I'll be in Belgium.
Oh.
That's a couple weeks out, for Polkadot Decoded. So that I'm excited about. But yeah, other than that, it's mostly just doing the work and also trying to keep up with what is an everyday set of updates. But what about you, Steven and Ron?
So next Thursday is the jobless claims report. So at 8:29, I will have my phone out ready to text you both about what that number is and what I think about it. Like you, Josh, just doing a lot of catch up. I'll announce in advance we're working to plan our October 24th event in New York City. We'll make more public announcements about that. Next week we have a special guest, if I can mention, Josh and David, our old friend Steve Ehrlich, who's editor now at Forbes, covering all things crypto and blockchain. He'll be here joining us next week for some of his perspectives on the industry. And for everyone in the audience, I just want to ask Josh, please like our live stream. Please share. Please subscribe and follow us on LinkedIn and on Twitter.
There's no cost to subscribe.
So that's going to be a good chunk of my weekend and the balance of the week, and then finding a new book to read. Pretty straightforward. David?
Well, Sunday is Father's Day, so I'm very much looking forward to being with my father in Florida and my daughter and my family. So I'm aunts and uncles and cousins. So I'm looking forward to a barbecue and enjoying that. I think I'm really looking at the price action. I really think that it's been kind of underreported, this altcoin sell-off. And so I'm going to be looking at that some more. And then, Ron teased it a little bit. I think we are going to see a sell-off in Bitcoin and Ethereum. And, maybe we retrace in Ethereum all the way to where it was before the announcement of the ETF. I think we're sort of going to be in a slower volume summer, but I think, we may see some selling.
So can I ask?
Sure.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Josh.
And I see Ron has a question as well, and I stopped him mid-question. Sorry.
No, Josh, I'm sorry. I was just going to ask David, crystal ball, do we break 60 downward on BTC?
That's a really good question, Ron. I think there's a lot of resistance at 60,000, so
Yep.
I'm going to say no right now. Maybe like it could go down for like a blip for like a minute or like an hour or two. But like on a daily close, I don't really think we have more than one daily close below that. But my only caveat will be is unless something, in Ukraine or in the Middle East really flares up, then that'll be my one caveat to that.
Sorry, Josh.
Oh, no. I mean, I have a similar question. But when you mentioned that you thought it was possible that the price could retrace all the way to where it was when we first started hearing about the, I guess the 19B4 rule change approval. What makes you think that? I'm just curious. I know there are all these patterns that I don't follow, like the sideways cross with a hat. And I just made that up, but
sideways cross with a hat. I love it.
Josh is going to be Googling Golden Cross this weekend. So, in fairness, the prices of Bitcoin, of Ether has already retraced more than half of where it was before. She's going to look it up right now.
Yeah, I know.
So in fairness, Ether got to like 38, 39, and now we're back to 34. So I'm not necessarily making Can you hear us now?
I can. Okay. And I missed the part that you were just saying somehow.
We're having a little fun. We're having a little
Josh
fun.
Walked away.
Expense, Josh. No,
it was a technical thing.
So I was just saying that, look, Ether's already gone down about 500 points or $500 since the run up after the announcement. So it really would only go down about another $400 to around 3,000 when the announcement was made, 3,100. So I just feel like if we're going to see somewhat of a sell-off in crypto, that sort of would make sense. And I think, Bitcoin's been trading in the 60,000 to 72,000 sort of funnel. So it wouldn't surprise me to go back to the bottom of that funnel. I think people really thought we were going to get a rate cut, this week, and we're disappointed by that. And I think the idea that it's not coming before September really just, is another element of people just sort of, taking the foot off the pedal for now.
David, do you still see miner selling pressure on BTC?
There was a lot of it.
Yeah.
There was a lot of it. And what we're talking about is the miners are selling their Bitcoin to fund their operations. So whatever Bitcoin they mine, they're selling it. So there's been a lot of selling pressure. I think, look, a lot of people are asking, there's been a lot of buying in the Bitcoin ETFs and asking why the price hasn't moved up accordingly. I think maybe that's an issue we can tackle next week. But there's some interesting dynamics going on. So, but I'm still very bullish for us, as an industry and where we're going this year. But I think the summer is going to be, maybe a slow drip down the next, maybe 4 to 6 weeks, maybe till the end of August.
I'm not taking the crystal ball out because I lose to David every time. So I'm just going to let it.
I still have 2 steak dinners.
You guys have been good. Like I think this whole thing, like when you're saying now people are surprised that the next rate cut might be in September. I feel like you guys have been saying that for a while. Like I feel like you've been right on point.
All right, so you're forcing me to take my crystal ball out and disagree with David a little bit. I think with summer coming, I think we'll continue to see miners selling into this, David, to fund given energy prices that I think are going to go up a little bit. Going back to our inflation hypothesis, it's a little worse than people think. I think I think the next leg down is 57.5 for Bitcoin for a sustained period.
Okay.
So I don't know what the wager is. I don't want to make a wager. I'm sorry.
I'm always happy to take your dinners, Ron. Look, I certainly don't think that's like a crazy idea at all. But let's see. I just think there's a lot. I think really does that buy in May and go away or sell in May and go away. I think we're seeing some of that right now. But we all know how fast our industry moves, and one unexpected event could trigger something up or down. So
very true.
Yeah. well, I want to wish all the fathers out there a happy Father's Day.
Yes.
Yeah.
Happy Father's Day to all the fathers.
Really enjoyed this episode of our podcast. Encourage people, like you said, Ron, to like it and share it with your friends, and sure we'll spur some interesting conversations. And look forward to being with everybody next Friday.
All right, we'll leave it there. Josh, thank you so much. Josh, any last words? Any predictions from you, Josh?
I mean, nobody wants my predictions, but I do enjoy yours. Both of you.
We'll leave it there. Have a great weekend,
my
friends.
My prediction is just builders will keep building. That's as far as I go.
That always wins. Yes, you're absolutely right. Well, Josh, David, thank you so much. For our friends in the audience, again, thank you for joining us again. As David and Josh mentioned, please subscribe, please like, please share. We'll be back next week with our special guest. Really looking forward. Have a great weekend. Happy Father's Day, everybody.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Happy Father's Day.